You wander through the shadows of the dark little passage. The creeping walls begin to narrow as you feel your knees sink. As the dust thickens, a haunting howl of times gone by rings. Your palms brush the sharp floorboards as your box caves down, legs pressed, neck crowned, and as you steal your last breath, you glimpse the yellow death and succumb to the sponge. Did you ever feel like something in SpongeBob SquarePants was a little off? In its golden age, the show had a remarkable ability to immerse viewers into the universe, where you were forced to surrender yourself to the characters and stories without feeling the pull of inconsistencies. We all knew Bikini Bottom. It didn't matter which way the Krusty Krab was from SpongeBob's house, or which incidental fish changed voices mid-season. The show always felt confident in its own world, theming, and characters, and as such, the themes and ideas were ingrained more naturally into our heads. And there's nothing wrong with that. The show was light-hearted and well-written, with some strong morals, funny and creative ideas, and memorable characters. But with this power came a slight caveat, that being no show is perfect, and thus we're all easily able to point to standout moments, flaws, and infamous scenes that were lodged into our developing minds. When the show begins to define these moments into the status quo is when things get a bit more nuanced and we tend to brush them aside. So one night as I was about to fall asleep, this question came to mind. A question I had never considered before, nor seen any talk of it online. Why are there so many SpongeBob episodes where people get stuck in small spaces? It's a question you don't really consider when watching SpongeBob, nor even begin to notice until you start to find examples. Stuck in the Ringer, Wishing You Well, Truth or Square, Doing Time, Slimy Dancing. The more you comb over SpongeBob as a series, especially in the middle seasons, the more you see this motif pop up. But why SpongeBob specifically? It's not like being stuck is necessarily an uncommon trope in cartoons. It's a very simple premise that gives clear stakes for a story. But with the fantastical world of Bikini Bottom, where you frequently see over-exaggerated animations just to emphasize emotions, to have the characters stuck in something felt a bit strange given the whimsical nature of the show. None of these moments are ever given much gravity. Instead, the plot marches on with naive characters, not giving a second thought on the matter. It's a cartoon, sure, but a very small part of me finds it frustrating, you know? It's like we, the viewer, are being gaslit into accepting this without a second thought because of the nature of the show. It's happy-go-lucky, it's wacky. There's no physical consequences for any of this. But that exact structure is what sparks this feeling of uneasiness whenever something strangely anatomically human happens. It's why we tense up at the Squidward toenail scene, or the splinter. It's so much of a juxtaposition to the tone of the show that is never particularly warranted, acknowledged, or resolved. And it's why whenever I would watch any of these stuck episodes as a kid, and even today, I feel strangely claustrophobic. I don't consider myself to be intensely claustrophobic, nor get stressed out by claustrophobic media. It's physical situations that don't have an easy out that get to me more often than not, especially when I'm cramped. Long airplane journeys, underground caves or subways, anything where I can't hit a panic button to return to my comfort zone, or even take a break and continue later. And I imagine many of you feel similarly. But claustrophobia can be so much more than that, being hypervigilant on exits, doors and windows and whether or not they're locked, crawl spaces, public restrooms, being stuck in heavy traffic. So why the hell am I relating any of this to the antics taking place in Bikini Bottom? Because it's never just being in a small space in SpongeBob, it's being trapped in an inescapable position. When they shrunk Squidward with the Wumbo belt, it wasn't just Squidward in the jar. They had to cramp the entire town in there, all at the mercy of an idiot who was stupid enough to also shrink himself, leaving all of them stuck like this. Pretty scary to think about outside of the context of the show, being debilitated to the whim of someone stupid for no good reason. Or what about in Stuck in the Ringer, where we just have to watch SpongeBob desperately try to escape his ringer, only for the whole town to turn against him. There's even an example to be made from the SpongeBob movie, where Mr. Krabs is frozen but still conscious for days as Plankton taunts him. Specifically, these kinds of situations appear a lot in SpongeBob, where a character gets fully immobilized whilst still aware, and they sort of remind me of the dreaded locked-in syndrome. Not to trivialize the severity of it by any means, but these scenes somewhat evoke that same feeling of conscious but stuck in your own body, albeit to a fraction of the extent that actual locked-in syndrome does. And more often than not in these scenes, they'll lean into the other characters' naivety and stupidity, which makes the protagonist's plight all the more frustrating, especially when the episode's conflict is never really resolved by the end. This feeling isn't foreign to SpongeBob, as many have expressed their concerns with what's known as Squidward torture episodes, which similarly evoke that feeling of frustration with Squidward's comeuppance never being deserved, nor has justice ever really served to SpongeBob and Patrick for their abuse towards Squidward. And there's plenty of overlap between these Squidward torture episodes and the stuck ones. Episodes like SquidBob Tentacle Pants have Squidward and SpongeBob merge, but with SpongeBob having the most control over them. That's not to mention the ending of this episode, which really goes the extra mile for infamous scenes. Or when Squidward gets cast in stone in The Thing, an episode which particularly creeped me out as a kid. Or even his interaction with Patrick and jellyfishing whilst stuck in a full body cast, unable to speak. Can't help but feel sorry for Squidward in these scenarios, and more often than not he gets the short end of the stick when it comes to these trapped episodes. But I'm sure you've heard all of this before. There's plenty of channels out there that just recap Squidward torture episodes and call it a day, but we're here to go deeper. SpongeBob just fosters this mentality of inescapability, especially through that primary dynamic of the happy SpongeBob and the long-suffering neighbour Squidward, who can never seem to avoid him, only ever emphasised by the loneliness of the main locations of the show, with nobody else for Squidward to turn to. The only episode in which Squidward does break the loop highlights his desire for loneliness, his want to be trapped in chaos and feel something, instead of being free but going through the monotonous cycle of everyday life. Squidward seems to be the recipient of most of these trapped episodes, but it's not just small spaces that are used in these sorts of plots with him. Sometimes wide open areas do just as good at promoting that uneasy feeling. Like in Squid's Visit or Squidward and Clarinet Land, places that are much bigger on the inside and that seem to go on forever, a la the Backrooms. And it becomes even more frustrating when you remember it's not an evil force behind it, just a nonchalant happy-go-lucky sponge that ends with no moment of clarity or resolution. That might be why more narratively satisfying plotlines go unnoticed compared to these more infamous episodes. Whenever Plankton gets involved in these, it's because he deserves it. Justice is restored by the episode's end, and so it doesn't stick out as much in the series. And I think that intent is why the regular stuck plots feel so uncomfortable. As I said before, this isn't an uncommon plot to use in cartoons. Character is stuck, character needs to escape, character escapes. It's simple. But the intent is what makes SpongeBob stand out in this department. SpongeBob is unapologetically naive about how it presents these scenarios. The show is meant to be a fun, light-hearted animated comedy, and utilises that medium to create whimsical scenarios. But it's when they're taken to these levels of hopelessness, without anyone seeming to care and no gravitas put on the situation, does it begin to worm its way to the back of your minds that something doesn't quite fit, despite the tone of the show trying to tell you otherwise. It reminds me of Homer's enemy from The Simpsons, being in the shoes of Frank Grimes, where nobody puts any attention on the serious matter because everyone around him is an idiot. And by the end of the episode, they're all laughing into the credits, like the show is trying to tell us that nothing ever happened. We feel like we are the Frank Grimes when Squidward gets cast in stone, or when Squidward gets stuck in a time capsule, screaming out for help that cannot hear us, whilst the only two saviors piss about next to us. When other shows have these stuck plots, they're always treated with the appropriate tone that the respective show is known for. Bob's Burgers, for example, never sugarcoats these situations, instead using them to raise the stakes or progress a character relationship by showing there are people that care for their rescue, or subversing the trope, like when Linda stops caring about Bob's escape from the wall, that's when you know something is wrong, and when these situations are solved, they celebrate it, leading to a well-rounded story. The scenes themselves share those claustrophobic elements that SpongeBob does, but the way they're handled, that is to say the intent and subsequent consequences of them, in shows like Bob's Burgers don't lay off the severity of them, because that's part of the show's tone. You can see this exact premise in its opposite state in shows like Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, which has a purposefully nihilistic tone, so leaning into this more melancholic angle is expected of the show, especially when the characters are punching bags that often deserve their treatment. Billy and Mandy shares a really similar scene with SpongeBob in one of its episodes, which shows a Cronenbergian blob of our main characters, very similar to the ending of SquidBob Tentacle Pants. And, whilst still a pretty gruesome image, don't get me wrong, it works to the show's more gruesome and evil tone. The same scene in SpongeBob is simply haunting compared to the usual whimsy the show presents, when none of the characters deserve to be in this mess. And when the character writing for SpongeBob is so strong and relatable, you really feel that uncomfortableness through the screen from the whole cast, and the hopelessness of Squidward especially. To understand what it is that makes SpongeBob stand out in this way is one thing, but we still haven't answered the bigger question. Why are there so many of these episodes in SpongeBob? Well, I believe one reason is because they've realised it worked. The team behind SpongeBob have shown they aren't afraid to lean into audience response. Modern SpongeBob especially seems to really pander to what people liked in the original seasons. You see a lot more wacky faces, episodes dedicated to a gag that has long since died out, like my leg, It's pretty desperate at times, but that's really the only way you sustain a show like SpongeBob that has been running for so long. Give the people what they want. From a business standpoint, it just makes sense. But how do you go about this before the widespread use of the internet? Well, the only way to truly gauge public interest back then is from critical ratings, audience numbers, and general word of mouth. If we look at the ratings from the first 3 seasons of SpongeBob, an interesting trend emerges regarding episodes I've marked as either containing claustrophobic scenes, or more light but still noteworthy motifs, like someone being tied up. The average rating for these episodes appears to be much higher than for episodes that don't have these trapped plots. We get a very clear indication from this in Season 1, surprisingly barely any claustrophobic episodes at all in Season 2, and a healthy sprinkling of it in Season 3. Around this point in the show is where the first SpongeBob movie was released, and as I mentioned earlier, it also shares a stuck motif, with a frozen but still fully aware Mr. Krabs. You could also argue the mind control bucket hat suctioning down onto the citizens' heads also fits the same theme. But it's what happens immediately after this, when the show was renewed following the success of the movie, that is very interesting. The number of stuck episodes seems to skyrocket in seasons 4 and onwards. Whether this is because of ratings is hard to tell, since you can find skewing data in just about anything if you look hard enough. It's also important to point out that each episode is considered one 22-minute show made of 2 segments, so it could mesh the claustrophobic and non-claustrophobic episodes together. Regardless, I think it's an interesting pattern to find, something that may have passed on to the new writers in the middling seasons after gaining traction in the earlier days of the series. But this doesn't feel like a satisfying answer, does it? The reason why there are so many stuck episodes is because of good business? There's something else here, something about the world of SpongeBob SquarePants that not only makes trapped plotlines feel unnatural, but motivates the creation of them. And it's been staring us in the face this whole time. Why do we cringe up at moments like Squidward's toenail or SpongeBob's splinter? It's because they're realistic. And I don't mean realistic in that undersea creatures would experience this, it's that an element of humanity is being shown off, something physical that we the viewer can relate to. And it stands out given the show's usual imaginative sense of physical comedy, separate from the real world. SpongeBob characters exist in this weird grey area of relatability. The character writing is so strong, but the exaggerated designs and amplified slapstick of characters give them a degree of separation when watching. And that's okay. It's what helps SpongeBob succeed in its strong physical comedy without feeling out of place. SpongeBob is a sponge. He's naturally squashy and stretchy by our prerequisites. The designs of other main characters of the show, like Patrick and Squidward, back up this philosophy. We can separate ourselves from these characters because we don't see ourselves in them physically. They're sea creatures, and just like actual sea creatures, we can't immediately value their realism on the same level as human characters. Look, take this as an example. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, the 2 characters closest to what we consider humans in Bikini Bottom. You never ever see them have exaggerated limbs or lose a limb for the sake of a joke, whereas with SpongeBob, we never think twice about it. And I believe that's why plotlines and moments about getting stuck are so common in SpongeBob. The character designs lend themselves more to these situations. It's a lot easier in a world where you don't have to abide to relatable human anatomy, find unique physical limitations for the characters. And so you can push the boat out in terms of scenarios the cast can realistically not be hurt by. And I think it's a testament to the character writing of SpongeBob that they seem so consistently able to make me care for the characters and feel their situations from the perspective of a human. So I think that's the best answer I can give as to why trapping scenes in SpongeBob affect me, and why there's so many of them. The character writing of the show is just really good, and the tone switching is far more nuanced than I gave it credit for as a kid, whether intentional or not. Seasons 4 to 6 of SpongeBob will always be my favourites from the show, even if it is for nostalgic reasons alone. And pointing out these flaws doesn't make these seasons any less special to me. SpongeBob was a show that could make me feel a tiny bit strange without knowing why, and that's what made it so memorable for me, even if it may have ever so slightly fueled my little bit of claustrophobia from a young age. Now, granted, I haven't seen much of the show past season 7 or 8, so I'm not as knowledgeable on the frequency of the trapped episode plots in the modern era. From what I've seen, they lean a lot more into unrealistic physical comedy, with stakes being less focused on something as trivial as being stuck in a small space. But for all I know, they could have doubled down on these plots, or axed them completely, and maybe Mermaid Man's arms do fall off at some point. But maybe, just maybe, I've convinced some of you watching that the SpongeBob team has an evil conspiracy to get kids to hate being stuck in cramped car journeys, so they can stay at home and watch more Nickelodeon. Hey, thanks so much for watching until the very end of this video. I really appreciate the support on the last couple of videos I posted. And I know this video might be a bit more niche, but it's something that I care pretty strongly about, as ridiculous as that may sound. I do have more video game related topics that are stuck in the ringer at the moment coming up, as well as other animation stuff. I'm just trying to figure out my own groove at the moment, see what really clicks. So if you are just in it for the animation topics or the video game topics, then don't worry, because I still have plenty of ideas for both of them to come. Anyway, that'll be it for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I would really appreciate it if you subscribed. And if you really hate me, then come yell at me in my Twitch streams. Alright, peace.